In 2015, in a quiet suburb of Seattle, Sarah found a hidden diary, revealing her mother-in-law's 20-year obsession with controlling her every move. "I'm coming over for dinner tonight, Sarah. No need to fuss." The words sliced through the receiver like a dull knife. Margaret's voice, syrupy with that false warmth she wielded so well. Sarah gripped the phone tighter, her knuckles whitening against the cool plastic, as if it could anchor her against the sudden churn in her stomach. The kitchen clock ticked relentlessly, each second a hammer strike, amplifying the silence that followed. She stood there, frozen amid the clutter of half-unpacked grocery bags, apples rolling lazily across the counter, a carton of milk sweating condensation onto the linoleum, the faint scent of ripening fruit mingling with the stale air. "Margaret, tonight, we have plans," Sarah managed, her voice threading thin, laced with the plea she hated hearing in herself. Plans. A lie, but one born of desperation. The house was their sanctuary, a fragile bubble she'd fought to seal after the baby's colicky nights and David's endless overtime. Privacy wasn't a luxury, it was survival, a thin veil against the world's relentless press. "Nonsense. David mentioned you've been letting little Emma stay up past 8 again. Terrible for her routine, dear. I'll bring my lasagna, properly seasoned, none of that quick nonsense you do. We can talk about it then." The line hummed with Margaret's certainty, each word a subtle erosion, chipping at the walls Sarah had so carefully built. Undermine. That's what this was, the first fracture in the facade of polite distance. Sarah's pulse quickened, a hot flush creeping up her neck, the air in the kitchen growing heavier, thicker with the weight of impending intrusion. Rage flickered beneath the anxiety, unbidden and sharp, like swallowing glass. Who was Margaret to dictate Emma's bedtime? To imply Sarah's choices were sloppy, insufficient? But the fear coiled tighter, losing control, watching her family's boundaries dissolve under the weight of this woman's need to matter, her presence like a shadow lengthening across the room. "I really don't think," Sarah started, but the front door creaked open then, David's keys jangling like a warning bell. He shuffled in, shoulders slumped under the invisible burden of the day. His tie loosened like a noose half escaped. His eyes met hers, questioning, already sensing the storm brewing in her silence. The faint scent of his office, coffee and printer ink, clinging to his shirt. "Who's that?" he murmured, dropping his briefcase with a thud that echoed too loudly in the narrow hallway. He stepped closer, hand brushing her arm, a passive touch, meant to soothe, but landing like an evasion, his skin warm yet distant against hers. Sarah covered the mouthpiece, whispering fiercely, "Your mother, insisting on dinner. Now." Her words carried the weight of accusation, though she aimed it at the air between them, not him. David's face paled, his drive to placate warring visibly with the stress etching lines around his mouth. He rubbed his temple, avoiding her gaze, the shadow of his own avoidance stretching long across the faded wallpaper. On the line, Margaret pressed on, oblivious or uncaring. "I won't take no for an answer, Sarah. Family sticks together, doesn't it? I'll be there at 6. Tell David I said hello." The click of disconnection left a void, buzzing faintly before Sarah slammed the phone down, the impact vibrating up her arm, the sharp crack echoing in the confined space. David hovered, hands in his pockets, voice low and conciliatory. "Maybe it's not so bad. She means well. One dinner won't hurt." Sarah whirled on him, her anxiety boiling over into something raw, edged with that buried rage. "It's not one dinner, David. It's her marching in, telling me how to raise our daughter. Telling us." The words hung, heavy with the unspoken fractures already spiderwebbing through their peace. The kitchen felt smaller, the walls pressing in, the scent of spilled orange juice turning cloying, sticky in the humid air. Unease settled deep in her chest, a cold weight that promised more intrusions to come. Margaret's voice echoing in her mind, planting doubts that rooted like weeds in fertile soil, the oppressive quiet amplifying every creak and sigh. David sighed, stepping back, his passivity a chasm she couldn't bridge. "Let's just Get through it. But Sarah knew better. This was the beginning, the slow unraveling of their private world under the guise of care, the shadows deepening as the afternoon wore on. She set the receiver down with a soft click, the echo reverberating through the empty kitchen like a final verdict. The afternoon stretched into a suffocating haze, each breath heavy with the bile of unspoken fury. As shadows lengthened across the countertops, Sarah turned to the stove, her fingers fumbling with aprons and utensils, the air thick with the dread of inevitability, the faint metallic tang of tension lingering on her tongue. Suspicion gnawed at the edges of her rage. Had her spouse orchestrated this ambush all along? Mom just called, and she's insisting on dinner tonight, like it's already set in stone. Sarah paused in the midst of chopping carrots, the knife hovering mid-slice, as David's words landed with a thud in the cramped kitchen. The blade bit into the wooden board with a sharp crack, sending flecks of orange scattering across the scarred surface, the earthy scent of vegetables sharp in the steamy air. She turned slowly, wiping her hands on the frayed edge of her apron, the fabric rough against her palms. David's eyes darted to the sink, then back to her, his shoulders hunched as if bracing for the fallout, the faint hum of the refrigerator underscoring the growing tension. "What do you mean, already set?" Sarah's voice came out low, edged with a heat she couldn't quite suppress. The steam from the simmering pot on the stove curled upward, carrying the sharp tang of onions and garlic, thickening the air until it pressed against her skin like an unwanted embrace, warm and insistent. David shifted his weight from one foot to the other, the floorboards creaking under his sneakers. He rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture so familiar it twisted something deep in her gut. I invited them last week. Mom mentioned it in passing, and I thought it'd be nice, to smooth things over after the last visit. Emily's coming too. She's been asking about you." Emily. Sarah's mind snagged on the name, a flicker of gratitude warring with the rising tide of doubt. Her friend had texted earlier, offering to drop by with wine and an ear, sensing the strain without Sarah saying a word. But now, folded into David's casual reveal, it felt like another layer of orchestration, as if even her support was being co-opted. She set the knife down deliberately, the metal clinking against the counter like a warning bell. The kitchen, with its peeling wallpaper and the faint hum of the refrigerator, suddenly felt smaller, the walls inching closer, the air heavy with the scent of simmering herbs turning sour. "You invited them without asking me?" The question hung there, not quite an accusation, but laced with the slow simmer of betrayal. Sarah's pulse throbbed in her temples, each beat fueling the quiet fury building behind her eyes. She could picture Margaret's satisfied smile, the way she'd weave herself into their routines, questioning every choice, from the softness of the baby's blankets to the timing of naps, as if Sarah's instincts were little more than amateur guesses, her presence a fog that obscured their fragile peace. David's face softened, pleading. "Sarah, please, it's just dinner. Mom's been lonely since Dad's trips got longer, and I didn't want to make a big deal. Emily will be there. She'll back you up. We can keep it light." Light. The word grated, illusory as the steam dissipating into nothingness. Sarah crossed her arms, feeling the cool draft from the window slither down her spine, raising gooseflesh on her arms. Doubt crept in, insidious. Did David see her resistance as pettiness? Was he already siding with the woman who'd raised him, planting those subtle seeds that made Sarah question her own grip on their home? The thought coiled tight in her chest, suspicion blooming like a bruise under pressure, the room's shadows lengthening with the fading light. Before she could respond, the doorbell chimed, a shrill interruption that shattered the moment. Emily's voice called from the hall, muffled but bright. "Hey, it's me. Brought that Cabernet you like." David exhaled, relief flashing across his features as he moved to answer it. Sarah stayed rooted, watching him go, the knife still gleaming on the counter, its edge catching the dim light like a silent threat. The preparations would continue, pots bubbling and plates clattering. But the fracture had widened, a hairline crack threatening to split everything apart. Margaret's arrival loomed now, not as a surprise, but as an invasion premeditated. And Sarah's trust in the man beside her frayed just a little more, the air growing thicker with unspoken dread. The afternoon blurred into a haze of reluctant preparations, Sarah's hands trembling as she set the table with forced steadiness. Dread coiled tighter in her chest with each passing hour, the kitchen's warmth turning stifling under the weight of impending scrutiny. As twilight seeped through the windows, they arrived at the family home, the door's creak echoing like a warning. Settling into the heavy oak chairs, the room's air thickened, shadows lengthening across the plates, in a slow, suffocating prelude to the evening's unraveling, the faint scent of polished wood mingling with the tension. "Is this the way you always prepare the roast, dear?" Evelyn asked, her fork pausing midway to her mouth, the steam from the overcooked beef still curling faintly in the dim light of the dining room. Sarah's hand tightened around her wineglass, the stem cool and slick against her palm, as the question sliced through the clink of silverware. She forced a smile, the kind that pulled at her cheeks without reaching her eyes, and glanced at David across the table. He was already looking away, buttering his roll with deliberate slowness, his shoulders hunched, as if the weight of the room pressed them down. Emily, seated beside Sarah, shifted in her chair, her napkin crumpling slightly under her fingers, but she said nothing yet, her gaze flicking between the two women like a watchful sentinel, the air heavy with the savory aroma, now edged with unease. "It's a family recipe," Sarah replied, her voice steady but laced with the effort it took to keep it so. The savory scent of rosemary and garlic hung thick in the air, now soured by the undercurrent of Evelyn's scrutiny. Sarah had spent the afternoon in the kitchen, the sizzle of the pan and the chop of vegetables a rhythm to drown out her anxiety. But now, with the plates served and the candles flickering shadows across the floral wallpaper, it all felt exposed, undermined, the light casting long, wavering patterns that seemed to close in. Evelyn tilted her head, her silver earrings catching the light like tiny accusations. "Oh, I see. Well, it's hearty, isn't it? Though in my day, we always seared it first to lock in the juices. Wouldn't want it drying out like this. Makes it tough for little ones if they're joining us someday." She dabbed at her lips with a napkin, her eyes lingering on Sarah's midsection, as if probing for weaknesses beyond the meal. The candle flames guttering slightly in the draft. David cleared his throat, the sound rough in the quiet. "Mom, it's fine. Sarah did a great job." But his words lacked conviction, trailing off as he pushed peas around his plate, avoiding the brewing storm. He wanted harmony, the easy flow of laughter and shared stories, not this fracture widening before dessert. Yet here it was, his mother's words planting doubts like weeds in the garden of their home. Doubts about Sarah's choices, her instincts, her place at the head of their table. The room's warmth turning oppressive. Emily leaned forward then, her fork tapping softly against her plate, a subtle anchor for Sarah. "The flavors are bold, Evelyn. I love how Sarah balances the herbs. It's got that warmth without overpowering." Her tone was protective, edged with concern, born from too many late-night calls where Sarah confessed her fears in whispers. Emily had her own scars from family battles, ghosts that made her insert herself here, advocating for walls that Sarah struggled to build. But even she felt the oppression now, the way Evelyn's gaze dismissed her, as if she were an intruder in this intimate unraveling, the clink of cutlery fading into tense silence. Sarah's pulse quickened, a cold knot forming in her chest. She could taste the fear rising, metallic on her tongue, mingling with the bite of underseasoned gravy. This wasn't just about the roast. It was the first crack in the facade. Evelyn's subtle erosion of her authority chipping away at the privacy she'd fought to claim. What if David started agreeing? What if the doubts took root, spreading to how she parented, how she decided their future? She glanced at him again, pleading silently for backup. But he only offered a weak nod, his passivity a deeper wound, the shadows from the candles deepening the hollows in his face. The clock on the mantel ticked onward, each second stretching the tension like taut wire. Evelyn smiled, innocuous, and speared another slice of meat. "Just a thought, dear, for next time." But the words lingered, igniting a slow rage beneath Sarah's fear. A fury at the invasion, the second-guessing that threatened to swallow her whole. Emily's hand brushed Sarah's under the table, a quiet vow of solidarity. But in that moment, the room felt smaller, the walls closing in with every chew and swallow, the air thick and unyielding. The dining room's dim glow seemed to pulse with restrained fury, the clink of silverware fading into a suffocating hush. Sarah's knuckles whitened around the glass, her frustration coiling like smoke from the ruined roast, eyes darting to her husband in a wordless bid for rescue. He leaned forward slightly, the chair's faint groan amplifying the tension, his face tightening with visible unease as the weight of the evening bore down, urging him toward a futile attempt to pierce the silence. Emily leaned forward, her napkin crumpling in her fist as she set it beside her plate. "Sarah, remember that time we tried that new marinade from the market? The one with the rosemary infusion? Tell Margaret how it turned out." Her voice cut through the scrape of forks on porcelain, aiming for lightness, but the words landed like stones in still water, ripples spreading through the heavy air. Sarah's gaze flicked to her, then dropped to the congealing gravy pooling on her plate. The candlelight from the centerpiece flickered across her face, casting shadows that deepened the lines of exhaustion around her eyes. She shifted in her chair, the wooden legs creaking faintly against the polished floor. But no reply came. Instead, her lips pressed into a thin line, her fork tracing idle patterns in the mashed potatoes, as if the motion could anchor her against the tide of unspoken barbs, the scent of cooling food turning cloying. Margaret's eyes narrowed, her silver bracelet jangling softly as she adjusted her hold on the wine bottle, pouring another measure into her glass with deliberate slowness. The ruby liquid glugged out, filling the silence that stretched like a taut wire. "Oh, do go on, Sarah. Emily's right. Family recipes are such a personal thing. I wouldn't want to overstep by suggesting improvements if you're set in your ways." Her tone dripped honey over thorns, each syllable probing for weakness, her posture rigid in the high-backed chair that seemed to throne her at the head of the table, the light glinting off her rings like distant warnings. Emily's pulse throbbed in her temples, the scent of overcooked beef turning sour in her nostrils, mingling with the faint metallic tang of her own rising frustration. She wanted to shatter the facade, to drag Sarah from this suffocating ritual, where every glance from Margaret chipped away at their shared life. But Sarah remained frozen, her shoulders hunched, retreating deeper into the armor of quiet that only fueled the old woman's advance. Emily's hand itched to reach across the linen cloth, to squeeze Sarah's knuckles and pull her back. Yet the air between them thickened with unspoken pleas. "Don't push. Don't make it worse." The room's shadows creeping longer. The clock on the mantel ticked onward, each second amplifying the weight pressing down on the room. The flicker of flames in the hearth casting elongated shadows that clawed at the walls, the faint hum of the refrigerator from the adjacent kitchen underscoring the isolation of this battlefield disguised as dinner. Margaret sipped her wine, her gaze sliding between them like a predator assessing prey, her smile a mask over the insecurity that drove her to claim every inch of territory. "Well, if no one's inclined to share, perhaps we should move to dessert. Unless, of course, you'd prefer I handle that next time. Purely to help, dear." Sarah's fork stilled entirely, her breath shallow, the frustration coiling in Emily's chest now a shared inferno, raging silently against the chains of courtesy that bound them all. Emily swallowed hard, tasting bile, her protective instincts warring with the fear that one more deflection might fracture everything they'd built. The evening dragged on, a slow unraveling, each pause heavier than the last, the air growing denser with every unspoken word. The forced levity dissolved into the heavy silence that followed, forks scraping like accusations against the china. Emily's words, meant to buoy the mood, only amplified the undercurrent of resentment simmering beneath the tablecloth, where resentful glances flickered like shadows in dim light. The air grew thicker, oppressive with unspoken barbs, as the evening's polite facade cracked under the weight of old grievances, her chest tightening with a rage that coiled tighter with each passing moment. Sarah's fork clattered against her plate, the sharp ping echoing through the dining room like a warning shot. She hadn't meant to drop it, hadn't even registered her hand loosening, but there it lay, tines glinting under the chandelier's unforgiving light, amid the half-eaten roast and wilting salad greens. The table fell silent, all eyes snapping to her, but Margaret's voice sliced through first, smooth as polished steel. "Oh, Sarah, speaking of markets," Margaret said, her smile a thin veneer over something sharper. "I was just reading about those freelance gigs you do. So brave, piecing together a living like that. In my day, a woman with your talents might have aimed higher, you know? A proper office, benefits, stability for the family." She dabbed at her lips with a napkin, eyes never leaving Sarah's face, as if appraising a flawed antique, the candlelight casting harsh angles on her features. The words landed like barbs, hooking into old wounds Sarah had bandaged over years of quiet endurance. Freelance gigs. Margaret's code for scattered hobbies, for choices that didn't fit her blueprint of wifely success. Sarah felt the heat rise in her chest, a slow uncoiling of fury she'd suppressed through too many dinners like this, where every compliment twisted into critique. Her career, her decisions, her life, all fodder for Margaret's need to steer, to remind everyone who held the family's invisible reins. And David, beside her, shifted in his seat, his knee brushing hers in a silent plea for calm, his fork scraping idly at his potatoes, as if the motion could smooth the jagged edges, the sound grating in the tense hush. Sarah's pulse thudded in her ears, drowning the faint clink of Emily's glass across the table. She wanted to laugh, or scream, but the rage built layer by layer, resentment festering like the congealing gravy on her plate. How many times had Margaret's advice chipped away at their privacy, at the boundaries Sarah fought to draw around her home, her marriage? Protect it, she thought, her nails digging into her palm. Don't let her win again. The pain a sharp anchor against the rising tide. Stability? Sarah's voice emerged low at first, trembling with the effort to contain it. But it gained force as she leaned forward, her chair creaking under the shift. "You think my work is unstable? I've built a life on my terms, Margaret, not scraping for approval from someone who treats every meal like a tribunal. You waltz in here, picking at my choices like they're yours to fix. But this is our family, our decisions, not your stage to direct." The room froze. David's hand froze midair, his wineglass hovering, forgotten. Margaret's fork paused inches from her mouth, a pearl of au jus trembling at its tip before it fell, staining the linen cloth. Emily's napkin twisted tighter in her lap, but no one spoke. Sarah's breath came ragged, the outburst hanging in the air, thick with the scent of overcooked rosemary and unspoken accusations. She saw the flicker in Margaret's eyes, defensiveness cracking into something raw, a glimpse of the insecurity that fueled her barbs, the fear of fading into irrelevance. But Sarah didn't care, not in that moment. The resentment burned bright, a dam finally breached, flooding the oppressive quiet they'd all endured for too long. David cleared his throat, his voice tentative, laced with the weight of his own suppressed storm. "Sarah, maybe we should—" "No," Sarah cut him off, her gaze locking on Margaret's. "Not this time." The words settled like ash, the tension coiling tighter, the family's fragile peace fracturing under the strain, the room's shadows seeming to deepen with every heartbeat. Margaret's words hung in the air like a noose tightening, each syllable wrapping around Sarah's throat, exposing the fractures in their shared facade. The betrayal she'd long suspected now clawed its way to the surface, raw and unrelenting, isolating her in a sea of judgmental stares. Rage simmered beneath her skin, a slow-burning fire that finally ignited. She shoved back from the table, chair scraping like a guttural cry, and bolted from the room, the door slamming shut behind her in a thunderous echo of fractured bonds. Sarah shoved her chair back, the legs screeching across the hardwood floor like nails on a chalkboard, splintering the fragile hush that had settled after the fork's clatter. Margaret's words, "Oh dear, clumsiness runs in the family, doesn't it?" hung unfinished in the air, her lips pursing into a thin line as the interruption yanked the room's attention back to Sarah. The chandelier above swayed faintly from the motion, casting erratic shadows that danced over the linen tablecloth, now dotted with stray peas and congealing gravy, the air thick with the scent of tension. David's hand froze midway to his water glass, his knuckles whitening around the stem. He shot Sarah a pleading glance, eyes wide with that familiar mix of exhaustion and desperation, as if willing her to swallow whatever fire was building in her chest. "Sarah, wait," he started, voice low and conciliatory, the peacemaker's reflex kicking in before she could fully erupt. But she was already rising, her napkin crumpling in her fist like a discarded truce. Emily, seated across from her, leaned forward slightly, her fork abandoned mid-bite, concern etching deeper lines into her forehead. She had come as Sarah's ally, dragged into this obligatory dinner to buffer the barbs, but now her protective instincts flared visibly, shoulders tensing, mouth opening as if to interject. "Margaret, that's not fair," she said, her tone measured, yet edged with the steel of someone who'd seen too many family fractures up close. Emily's own ghost whispered in her restraint. She gripped the table's edge, knuckles paling, afraid that pushing too hard might shatter Sarah's fragile composure entirely. Margaret straightened in her chair, her silver necklace catching the light like a noose tightening. Insecurity flickered behind her composed facade, a shadow from her own loveless upbringing that made every slight feel like erasure. She couldn't let go, not when control was the only tether holding her relevance in the shifting family orbit. "What's this now? A little accident, and suddenly we're all on trial?" Her voice dripped with feigned innocence, but the passive-aggressive lilt sharpened it into a weapon, probing for weakness, demanding submission. The words lingering in the heavy air. The room closed in, the walls paneled in dark oak seeming to lean inward, trapping the scent of overcooked rosemary and unspoken resentments. Sarah's pulse thundered in her ears, each beat fueling the rage that had simmered through months of these gatherings. Subtle digs at her housekeeping, her choices, her very place beside David. Betrayal twisted deeper now, David's silence a fresh wound, his passivity enabling the slow poison that eroded their marriage. She felt it all converging, the weight of eyes on her, the suffocating expectation to smile through the barbs, the isolation of standing alone against this entrenched dynamic. "I can't do this anymore," Sarah declared, her voice cracking like dry timber underfoot, raw with the fury she'd bottled for too long. She turned on her heel, the doorframe looming as her only escape. "This toxicity, it's poisoning everything. You all act like it's normal, but it's not. I'm done pretending." Her words echoed off the walls, heavy and final, as she stormed into the hallway, the door slamming behind her with a thud that reverberated through the house. In the dining room, silence reigned anew, thicker now. David slumped, rubbing his temples, the fear of fracture gnawing at him like an old ache. Margaret's chin lifted defensively, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of irrelevance's chill. Emily exhaled slowly, her protective drive unmet, watching the empty doorway where her friend had vanished. Alone, adrift in the storm she'd finally unleashed. Sarah stormed from the dining room, the door slamming behind her like a thunderclap that echoed through the house's stifling corridors. The cool night air outside did nothing to quench the fury boiling in her veins, each step on the gravel path grinding deeper into her resolve. Her spouse's footsteps followed, heavy and insistent, the oppressive weight of unspoken grievances pressing down as shadows lengthened around them, the confrontation inevitable, in the dim glow of the porch light. I can't do this anymore. The words claw up from my gut, raw and unbidden, as I burst through the back door, the screen slamming behind me like a gunshot in the stifling afternoon heat. The patio concrete bites into my bare feet, rough and unyielding, but I don't stop, pacing now, arms wrapped tight around my ribs, as if to hold in the scream building there. Margaret's voice still echoes inside, that poisonous lilt twisting the knife deeper. Clumsiness runs in the family. As if I'm the broken one, as if she hasn't been chipping away at us for years, the humid air thick with the scent of wilting grass. Footsteps thud behind me. David, of course. He pushes the door open, lets it creak shut with deliberate slowness, his shadow stretching long across the cracked pavers. "Sarah," he says, voice low, pleading already. "Come back inside. Emily's still there, and Mom, she's just trying to help." Help. The word ignites something feral in my chest, a spark flaring into white-hot fury. I whirl on him, my nails digging crescents into my palms. "Help? David, she's suffocating us. Every dinner, every visit. It's her way or nothing. She criticizes the way I fold your shirts, the meals I cook, even how I look at you. And you just sit there, smiling like it's all fine." He flinches, but his eyes dart back toward the house, that passive mask cracking just a fraction. Sweat beads on his forehead, not from the humidity pressing down like a lid on this godforsaken yard, but from the fear I know too well, the dread of discord ripping our world apart. "She's my mother," he murmurs, stepping closer, hands out like he's calming a spooked animal. "We can talk to her later, privately. Don't make a scene." A scene, as if I've been the villain all along, bottling this rage while she parades her advice like barbs wrapped in silk. My breath comes in sharp bursts, the air thick with the scent of overgrown jasmine choking the fence, its sweetness turning cloying, nauseating. No, no more talking. I've tried boundaries, polite ones, gentle ones, and she tramples them every time. She waltzes into our home unannounced, rearranges our life like we're her puppets. Last week, she threw out the baby clothes I picked because they weren't practical enough. "Our baby, David!" His face pales, the stress etching deeper lines around his mouth, but he doesn't fight back. Never does. Instead, he glances over my shoulder, and there she is, Emily, slipping out the door now, her expression a storm of concern, eyes wide and fierce. She's been my anchor through this, watching from the sidelines as Margaret's barbs land, her own family scars fueling that protective fire. "Sarah's right," Emily says, voice steady but edged, crossing to stand beside me. "I've seen it. The way she undermines you, it's not love, it's control. You deserve better." David's shoulders slump, torn between us, his drive to preserve the peace fracturing under the weight. "This is our family," he whispers, but it sounds hollow, desperate. The rage surges through me then, unfiltered, a dam bursting. I grab his shirt front, yanking him close enough to see the flicker of my fury reflected in his eyes. "Our family starts with us, with me and you and the life we're building. If you can't set boundaries with her, if you keep choosing silence over us, then decide now, because I won't live like this anymore. I won't let her destroy what we have." He stares, mouth opening and closing, the oppressive silence of the yard amplifying every ragged breath. Emily's hand squeezes my arm, solid and warm. But inside, the world tilts. Harmony shattered, the mask of civility in irreparable pieces. David's next words hang unspoken, the irreversible choice looming like a blade, the evening shadows swallowing us whole. The afternoon haze thickened into dusk, then endless nights of restless pacing. Indoors now, the house a cage of unspoken fury. 3 days crawled by in oppressive silence, my rage a slow coiling serpent, laced with gnawing unease over what words might unleash. Yet the need to confront it all burned brighter. Boundaries had to be drawn, expectations laid bare, no matter the backlash looming like storm clouds on the horizon, the air inside heavy with the scent of stale worry. That's when I realized Sarah had been carrying this weight alone for months. Her silence is not indifference, but a fortress crumbling from within. 3 days had dragged by since the dinner shattered like cheap china. The fragments still lodged in my thoughts. Margaret's barbed compliments, Sarah's forced smiles, the way the wine had soured on my tongue. I'd called this meeting in the dim living room of our rented house, the one with the sagging couch and walls that seemed to lean in, eavesdropping. The air carried the faint staleness of yesterday's takeout, mingling with the lavender diffuser Sarah always ran to mask the tension, though it only thickened the haze. I sat on the arm of the chair, knees pressed together, my notebook open on my lap like a shield. Boundaries, I'd scribbled earlier, the word stark against the lined paper. No more unannounced visits, no more critiques disguised as concern. Sarah perched beside me on the couch, her fingers twisting the hem of her blouse, eyes fixed on the coffee table where a single coaster sat askew. Margaret arrived last, her heels clicking against the hardwood like accusations, settling into the armchair with a sigh that filled the room. She looked smaller than usual, her cardigan draped over shoulders that had once commanded boardrooms, but her gaze, sharp, unyielding, betrayed the storm brewing, the faint scent of her perfume cloying in the close space. "Let's start," I said, my voice steady despite the knot in my chest. "We need to talk about how things have been, the intrusions, the expectations. It's wearing us down." I glanced at Sarah, willing her to speak, my frustration bubbling like acid. She'd promised to back me, to claim our space, but now her lips pressed into a thin line, hesitation etching lines around her mouth. Margaret leaned forward, her rings catching the lamplight. "Intrusions? Emily, dear, I'm just trying to help. Family sticks together." Her tone dripped with that familiar condescension, the one that masked her fear of fading into irrelevance. But tonight, it grated like sandpaper on raw skin, the light flickering across her tense features. Sarah shifted, her hand finding mine briefly, then pulling away. "Mom, it's not help if it feels like control." The words came out soft, tentative, and I felt a surge of hope laced with rage. Finally, she was trying. But then she faltered, eyes darting to Margaret's face. "I mean, we don't want to push you away. What if this causes a rift? What if everyone turns on us?" There it was, her fear spilling out, the conflict twisting her determination into knots. Margaret's eyes narrowed, her posture straightening as if slapped. "A rift? After everything I've done? You think I'm the problem?" Her voice rose, cracking the slow simmer we'd built, revealing the insecure child beneath the matriarch's veneer. Desperate, lashing out to feel seen, the room's shadows deepening with her rising tone. I couldn't hold back. "Yes, you are," I snapped, the rage uncoiling hot and fierce in my veins. My own shadows stirred, memories of my mother's silences, the protectiveness I'd sworn never to repeat, fueling the fire. "You've steamrolled us for years, Margaret, pretending it's love when it's just your need to matter." The words hung, sharp as broken glass, and Sarah gasped beside me, her hand hovering as if to pull me back, but too conflicted to move. Margaret's face flushed, her hands clenching the armrests until the fabric creaked. "Unimportant? That's what you think of me? After I raised her, sacrificed." She broke off, voice trembling, but the mask had splintered. The room pulsed with unease, our breaths sinking in ragged unison, the fragile harmony we'd faked dissolving into something raw and irreparable. Sarah's eyes met mine, wide with the dawning terror of boundaries crossed, and I knew we'd ignited a blaze none of us could contain. The air thick with the acrid scent of confrontation. Those 3 days had curdled into suspicion, a slow poison seeping through my veins, every shadow in the house whispering of fractures yet to break. By the 4th morning, the weight pressed heavier as I entered the stuffy boardroom for the meeting, the air thick with the scent of stale coffee and unspoken agendas. My jaw clenched, rage simmering beneath a veneer of control, boundaries etched in my mind like fragile borders on a map no one else bothered to read. The creak of the front door latch yanked me back, Margaret's voice from last Christmas, slicing through the eggnog haze. "David, dear, you really should let Sarah handle the finances. She's always been the practical one." Her words had lingered like smoke then, curling into my doubts about our life together. Now, 3 days after that disastrous dinner, Sarah and I sat at the kitchen table, the wood scarred from years of her mother's helpful visits. Our meeting was meant to be simple, just us mapping out boundaries before the next family intrusion. Sarah's fingers traced the edge of her notebook, her determination etched in the furrow of her brow, though I caught the flicker of second-guessing in her eyes. She wanted this, to draw lines against the endless tide of Margaret's needs, but the fear of fracturing what little harmony remained gnawed at her voice, the morning light filtering dimly through the curtains. "I've been thinking," Sarah said, her tone steady but laced with that quiet conflict. "We tell her no more drop-ins, not without calling first. Our home, our rules." She glanced at me, seeking alliance, her drive to protect us both shining through the cracks of her hesitation. I nodded, asserting what I could for the health of it all, even as my stomach twisted at the thought of the fallout. "Absolutely. We've let it slide too long. She respects us, or she stays away." My words felt assertive on the surface, but inside, the old avoidance stirred. Confrontation was a specter I preferred to sidestep, fearing it would unravel everything, the faint scent of brewed coffee turning bitter on my tongue. The doorbell rang then, sharp and insistent, shattering the fragile calm. Sarah's eyes widened, suspicion blooming in her gaze like ink in water.
"Who could that be? We didn't invite anyone."
I rose, peering through the peephole, and there she was, Margaret, unannounced as always, her coat clutched like a shield, a bakery box in hand. Donuts, probably. Her latest peace offering, laced with expectation. My pulse quickened with a sudden wariness. Why now, right when we were fortifying our walls? Was this coincidence? Or had she sensed our plotting, her insecurities driving her to test the gates, the air outside humming with distant traffic? Before I could signal Sarah to hold back, Margaret pushed inside as I opened the door, her perfume, a cloying rose that always seemed to thicken the air, flooding the entryway. "Oh, darlings, I was in the neighborhood and thought, why not pop by? These are fresh from that little shop you love, Sarah." She thrust the box forward, her smile brittle, eyes darting between us with a frustration she masked poorly. But I saw it, the resistance in her posture, the fear of irrelevance pushing her to invade, just as her childhood ghosts had taught her. Show up unbidden or be forgotten. The sweet scent of pastries clashing with the tension. Sarah stood, her notebook snapping shut. "Mother, this isn't a good time. We were in the middle of something private." Margaret's laugh tinkled, forced and tinny, but her gaze sharpened, suspicion mirroring Sarah's. Did she detect the undercurrent of rebellion? "Private? From family? Nonsense. David, tell her I'm not intruding. We've always shared everything." She bustled past, setting the box on the table, disregarding the invisible line we'd just drawn, her presence expanding like damp rot in the walls, the floor creaking under her steps. The rage simmered low at first, a slow burn in my chest as I watched Sarah's resolve waver, her hands clenching at her sides. But Margaret kept talking, oblivious or willful, her barbs disguised as care. "You two look so tense. Is it money again? Let me help. I know best." Her voice cracked on the last word, her own fears bubbling up, demanding relevance at any cost, the air growing heavier with each syllable. "That's it," Sarah exploded, her voice raw, the mask of politeness shattering like glass underfoot. "You don't know best, Mother. You never have. You waltz in here, uninvited, every time we try to breathe without you. We're done pretending this is normal." Margaret recoiled, color draining from her face, but her eyes flashed with defensive fury. "Ungrateful. After all I've done? You think you can shut me out like I'm nothing?" Her words hurled back, laced with the insecurities she'd buried deep, now clawing free. I stepped between them, my avoidance crumbling under the weight, voice rising despite the dread knotting my gut. "Enough, Margaret. This ends now. Respect our space, or leave." The argument erupted fully then, voices overlapping in a cacophony of accusations, the kitchen air thick with unspoken suspicions. What did she really want? Why couldn't she let go? The facade of harmony splintered wide, exposing the raw underbelly of resentment. And in that chaos, I wondered if we'd ever rebuild, the echoes lingering long after the shouts faded. Those lingering doubts coiled tighter in the weeks that followed, a slow poison seeping into every shared silence, every glance averted. The house felt heavier, its walls pressing in with unspoken accusations, my chest tight with a fear that masked the rage bubbling beneath. One stifling evening, as twilight bled through the curtains, the weight became unbearable, propelling me toward the confrontation I dreaded yet craved, the fading light casting oppressive shadows. The faint bitterness of yesterday's tea lingered on my tongue, a stale reminder as I stared at David across the kitchen table. Emily sat beside me, her fingers drumming a soft, insistent rhythm on the wood, while Margaret hovered by the sink, rinsing a plate with deliberate slowness. The water ran too hot. Steam curled up like accusations unspoken, filling the air with humid tension. "David," I said, my voice cracking the quiet like thin ice. "You've let her do this for years. Undermine me, every holiday, every decision, and you just stand there." He shifted in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight, his eyes flicking to Margaret before settling back on me. Assertive but conflicted, his shoulders squared as if bracing for a storm he half wanted to dodge. "Sarah, it's not like that. Mom's just opinionated. She's family. We can't—" "Family?" The word burned in my throat, hot and sharp. I leaned forward, the edge of the table digging into my palms. Emily's hand brushed my arm, a silent nudge. Be assertive. Push through the fear gnawing at my gut. But Margaret turned then, drying her hands on a towel, her face a mask of frustrated resistance. "Sarah, dear, you're overreacting. I only meant to help. David's right. We're all just trying to keep things together." Help. The word twisted like a knife, exposing the rot I'd buried under smiles and silent nods. Years of it. Her casual dismissals at dinners, her suggestions that chipped away at my voice in our home, our bed, our life. David never pushed back, always smoothing the edges, suppressing the fire I saw flickering in his eyes before it died. And me? Swallowing it all, the resentment building like pressure in a sealed jar, until now it threatened to shatter everything, the steam from the sink clinging to my skin. "No!" I snapped, rage coloring my words a deep, throbbing red. "You manipulate, Margaret. You make me feel small, irrelevant, like my thoughts don't matter. And David?" I turned to him, my chest tight with the fear of it all crumbling. "You let her. Every time. Our relationship? It's poisoned by this. I've suffered in silence, doubting myself. Us. Because you won't set boundaries." David's face hardened, but his voice wavered, assertive, yet laced with dread. "I advocate for us, Sarah, for healthy dynamics. But confrontation? It tears families apart. You know that." He glanced at Margaret, who clutched the towel tighter, her eyes narrowing. Frustrated, resistant, the shadow of her own childhood wounds flashing in her defensive stance. Unimportant. She'd never admit it, but there it was, fueling her need to insert herself, to matter at any cost. Emily leaned in, her voice hopeful but edged with frustration. "David, Sarah's right. She suffered enough watching this cycle. You have to choose. Healthy boundaries or watching it all disintegrate." Her protectiveness wrapped around me like a shield, born from her own unresolved scars. But it only amplified the fear coiling in my belly, the terror that this truth, raw and exposed, would implode us. Margaret's interference wasn't just meddling. It was a mirror to the cracks in David's avoidance, in my endurance, in the love we'd let fester. Margaret stepped closer, her voice rising, brittle. "This is absurd. I'm not the villain here. Sarah, you're letting insecurities—" "Stop." David's interruption was sharp, his fear of disintegration cracking through his assertiveness. He stood, chair scraping back, hands raised as if to hold the fragments together. But the air between us thickened, oppressive with the weight of buried resentment surfacing. Years of my silent rage, his suppressed truths, her unyielding presence. I felt it then.
the fear blooming cold and vast, not just of losing him, but of the manipulation's toll, how it had hollowed us out until only echoes remained. The tea's bitterness surged again as I swallowed hard, the argument hanging, unresolved, a slow fuse burning toward the end. The silence after my words hung heavy, thickening the air like smoke from Margaret's endless steam. Hours blurred into evening, the kitchen's oppression seeping into every corner of the house, my chest tightening with unspent fury. Pacing the dim hallway, fingers trembling over my phone, the rage coiled deeper, a defiant serpent ready to strike. In that shadowed solitude, autonomy burned through me, unyielding, as I composed the message that would sever the fragile ties. The echo of Margaret's footsteps, long faded down the hall. Only the drip from the faucet remained, a hollow punctuation in the kitchen's stifling quiet. I gripped my phone under the table, thumb hovering over the screen, while David shifted in his chair, his gaze fixed on the salt shaker like it held the family's fragile peace. Emily's drumming had stopped. Her hand now lay flat, nails digging faint crescents into the wood. Years of it. The way David's silences had stretched like shadows across our evenings, his unspoken deference to his mother's whims carving hollows in him, and in us. I'd watched him swallow barbs during holidays, his laughter forced, brittle as autumn leaves underfoot. And me, complicit in the quiet, biting back words that burned my throat, fearing the fracture they might cause. The manipulation wasn't just her endless intrusions, it was the slow poison of our endurance, eroding the trust we'd built brick by unresisted brick. Last night's call from her, demanding we host again, as if our home were her extension, had cracked something open. The toll hit me then, visceral. The resentment I'd buried, now clawing upward, hot and unyielding. "David," I said, my voice low, steady despite the tremor in my chest. He looked up, eyes wary, the lines around them deeper in the morning light slanting through the blinds. "We can't keep doing this, not like before." He leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice measured but edged with that familiar conflict. "Sarah, it's family. We talk it out, set some ground rules. Disintegration doesn't have to—" "No." The word cut sharper than I'd intended, but it felt right, defiant in the space it carved. Emily nodded beside me, her frustration mirroring mine, though hope flickered in her eyes. Hope that I'd finally claim the line she'd urged me towards so many times. Her own scars from a childhood of overbearing echoes made her voice it now, soft but insistent. "She's right. You've both suffered enough in silence. Assert it, Sarah. Boundaries aren't walls. They're breath." I unlocked the phone, the screen's glow harsh against my palm. The group chat stared back, me, David, his mother, siblings scattered like afterthoughts. My fingers moved before doubt could coil tighter. Effective immediately, future visits depend on mutual respect. No more unannounced arrivals, no more overrides of our decisions. This is our home, our life. We're done pretending otherwise. Send. The whoosh was final, a door slamming in digital silence. David's breath caught, his face paling as he glanced at his own phone buzzing on the table. "Sarah, that's crossing into truth," I finished, meeting his eyes, the rage simmering beneath my calm, a slow boil from years of suppressed fury. He wanted healthy dynamics, but his fear of conflict had kept us chained. Now, his assertiveness flickered, conflicted, as if weighing the family's pull against the man he'd become with me. Emily squeezed my arm, her touch grounding, protective in that way she wielded like a shield for us both. The phone vibrated, once, twice, responses incoming, but I set it face down. The kitchen pressed in, the scent of cooling tea cloying, the weight of what I'd unleashed settling like dust after a collapse. Defiance coursed through me, not triumphant yet, but alive, unapologetic. For the first time, our shared suffering felt like fuel, not chains. Hours dragged on in the kitchen's suffocating hush, the faucet's drip a relentless metronome to my mounting resolve. David's uneasy glances faded into the shadows as I stared at the screen, fingers tracing the edges of my decision. By midnight, the first messages pierced the silence,
Sharp barbs from the in-laws, their fury uncoiling like smoke, drawing allies into the fray. Isolation clawed at me, yet beneath the rage, a defiant spark flickered, questioning nothing but fueling my stand. Outside, the low rumble of a delivery truck grinding past the curb. Inside, my heart beat, a relentless drum against my ribs, drowning the faucet's drip. I stared at the phone screen, David's salt shaker vigil unbroken beside me. The device vibrated again, insistent, like a vein pulsing under skin. Texts flooded in, first from Aunt Lydia, then Uncle Tom, their words a cascade of indignation. "How dare you exclude us?" Lydia's message blared. "Family sticks together, Sarah." Margaret's devastated. Tom's followed. "This is ungrateful. After all we've done?" David's hand brushed mine under the table, tentative, but I pulled away. Years of this, swallowing their intrusions, their advice that chipped at our life like persistent erosion. The silent dinners where Margaret rearranged my kitchen with that knowing smile. The holidays where Sarah, my own sister, Emily's twin in temperament, nodded along to keep peace, leaving me to seethe alone. The manipulation had woven so deep, threading through our marriage like invisible sutures, pulling tighter with every concession. I'd let it, for David's sake, for the illusion of harmony. Now, the unraveling exposed the raw ache. How many nights had I lain awake, resenting him for not seeing it sooner? The front door creaked open without a knock. Margaret stormed back in, her face flushed, coat askew, Emily trailing behind like a shadow, my sister, ever the mediator, her eyes darting between us with that familiar conflict. "Sarah," Margaret spat, voice slicing the thick air. "You've poisoned the well. Lydia just called. Everyone's furious. You think you can dictate boundaries? After I raised David to value family above all?" Emily hovered near the counter, fingers twisting the hem of her sweater, her frustration bubbling beneath hopeful resolve. She wanted me to stand firm, I knew, her own buried family scars making her pushy, protective in ways that bordered on smothering. "Mom, maybe we should," she started. Voice soft but edged, driving toward assertion she rarely mustered herself. Margaret whirled on her. "No, Emily, this isn't your fight. Sarah's the one tearing us apart." Her eyes, red-rimmed, betrayed the fear gnawing at her. Irrelevant, cast aside in her own childhood echoes, now lashing out to reclaim control. She paced, heels clicking sharp against the tile, rallying her invisible army. "Tom agrees. Even Cousin Rebecca. You're isolating yourself, Sarah. Question that choice while you can." David shifted, mouth opening, but I raised a hand, the rage coiling hot in my chest, slow and unyielding like magma rising. The isolation hit then, a vice around my throat, the family web contracting, excluding me for daring to cut a thread. Emily's gaze met mine, conflicted determination flickering. She feared this fracture as much as I once had, second-guessing her own resolve in the face of it. Margaret loomed, resistant, her insecurities fueling the outrage, demanding relevance at any cost. But in that press, something shifted. The years of silent suffering cracked open, truth spilling like ink across the floor. This wasn't just their rally. It was my line drawn, boundaries etched in the silence I'd endured too long. "Enough," I said, voice steady, rising from the chair. The word hung, empowering in its simplicity, rage transforming to steel. David's eyes widened. Emily nodded, a spark of hope igniting her frustration. Margaret faltered, just a beat, but I pressed on. "We've bent for years, no more. This is our home, our life." The isolation lingered, oppressive, but in naming it, I claimed the space beyond, free, finally, from the shadows they'd cast. The texts piled on, each one a fresh stab, amplifying the rage that coiled tighter in my gut. David's salt-shaker figure loomed like a silent sentinel, the room's shadows thickening under the oppressive weight of unspoken grievances. Hours dragged into a sleepless vigil, my mind churning through betrayals until, in the gray light of pre-dawn,
A defiant clarity pierced the haze. Relief in the Fury's forge, the decision crystallizing. Summon them all to this very hearth for the reckoning. The living room. Dusk filtering through half-drawn blinds. David's hand still on the phone, as if anchoring it to the coffee table. I snatched it up before the next buzz could slice the silence. Margaret's name glowed on the screen, a summons I couldn't ignore anymore. My thumb hovered, then pressed accept. Her voice flooded in, sharp and unyielding, like gravel under boots. "Sarah, we need to talk. Now. Your father's been asking about you. And this nonsense about boundaries. It's ridiculous. Family doesn't just shut doors." David shifted beside me, his eyes flicking from the phone to my face, a quiet storm brewing in his posture. He wanted this fixed, mended with words he rarely spoke loud enough. But I felt the rage uncoiling in my chest, hot and familiar, fed by years of her intrusions, her endless pull on strings I never tied. "Not on the phone, Margaret," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor building in my core. "Come over. Bring whatever ghosts you need to drag in. We're doing this face to face." She paused, the line crackling with her breath. "What do you mean, we? David there? This isn't a committee meeting, Sarah. I'm your mother." David leaned closer, his whisper urgent against my ear. "You sure? We can wait. Talk it out first." His fingers brushed my arm, a plea wrapped in support. But I saw the flicker of his own fear, the family splintering like dry wood under too much weight. I pulled away, standing to pace the worn rug, its threads matted from countless arguments. The air in the room pressed thick, scented with the faint staleness of yesterday's coffee and the metallic tang of my rising pulse. "No more waiting," I told him, then louder into the phone. "Margaret, get here. Tonight. We'll hash it all out. The calls, the drop-ins, the way you act like my life's your unfinished business." Her laugh barked through the speaker, brittle and edged with that old hurt she wielded like a shield. "Assertive now, are we? Fine. I'll be there in 20. But don't think this changes anything. You can't just rewrite us." The call ended with a click that echoed in my skull. David rose, his face a map of conflict, brows knit as he searched my eyes. "Sarah, this could blow up. What if she brings Dad? Or worse, what if it pushes her away for good?" I met his gaze, the determination hardening even as doubt gnawed at the edges. What if I was wrong? What if boundaries meant losing them all? But the betrayal burned brighter, memories of her last unannounced visit flashing, cabinets rifled, judgments spilled like spilled milk. No more. "That's the point," I said, the words tasting like ash and freedom. "We invite them all. Tomorrow night. Here. A real gathering. No more side whispers, no more pretending. Everyone confronts it, or we end it." Margaret arrived sooner than promised, the front door slamming behind her like a verdict. She swept in, coat shedding flakes of evening chill, her eyes darting between us with that frustrated glare, the one that screamed her fear of fading into irrelevance. "Well, start your inquisition." David stepped forward, voice measured but firm. "It's not an attack, it's clarity, for all of us." She crossed her arms, lips thinning. "Clarity? From you two? My own daughter turning my son-in-law against me." Her tone cracked, revealing the child she'd buried. Unimportant, overlooked. I faced her, the rage peaking, a slow boil that finally spilled. "This isn't against you. It's for us. The toxic loops, the control, it stops. Tomorrow we gather the whole mess. You, Dad, us. We lay it bare, or I walk away. For good." The words hung, slicing the oppression into fragments. Margaret's defiance wavered, her shoulders slumping as the fight drained.